Welcome to the Music is the Best podcast with Sean and Tyson.
Hello and welcome to the Music is the Best podcast. I'm Tyson.
I'm Sean.
And welcome to episode number 2. I just want to take this time to thank everybody that has been listening on YouTube. Been a few of you out there, so thank you for listening. Like and share. And if you have any suggestions for further episodes, please comment down below. So last time on Music is the Best podcast, we sort of rambled on coherently, though, surprisingly enough,
Mostly.
about the stuff we were sort of listening to and whatnot. And for our episode 2, we've decided to sort of discuss specifics. Sean and I both picked sort of 3 albums to listen to and quasi-review.
Nutshell reviews, basically.
Yeah. And give you guys sort of an overview of what we've been into and maybe make some suggestions that you guys might like. This week, we will be reviewing, on my end, I'll be reviewing the Beatles, Yesterday and Today, their 1966 compilation album. Kraftwerk's The Man Machine, which came out in 1978, and The Flame, self-titled, which came out in 1970. Sean, what are you going to be covering today?
Well, Tyson, I'm going to be covering the Goat Rodeo sessions featuring Yo-Yo Ma, Stuart, Duncan, Edgar, Meyer, and Thile, which came out in October of 2011. Yes' first album, which came out in July of 1969. And Sleeps with Angels by Neil Young and Crazy Horse, which came out in August of 94.
Nice. I don't think I need to go too much into the backstory of the Beatles per se. I think, if you're listening to a music podcast, it's safe to assume that you've heard of the Beatles.
And if you haven't, you should check them out. They're really good.
They are a pretty decent band. So the album that I'm going to talk about today is actually, it's kind of a weird one. Back in the 60s, when they were on Capitol Records in North America, oftentimes the record label would reconfigure their British albums in order to make room for singles. They used singles as a promotional tool to sell albums, whereas that was not the case in England. So they would shave some tracks off to make room for singles. And ultimately, after a couple albums and a couple singles, they would have enough material to make new albums. So this one I'm talking about is one of these sort of compilations, comprised of tracks left over from their Help, Rubber Soul, and Revolver albums, and A and B sides of their current single, Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out. It was originally released on June 20th, 1966. It was their 9th album in 2 years for the American market. So let's let that sink in for a bit. Like I said, there's lots of reconfiguring of albums for the American market, whereas I think Revolver would have been maybe their 6th album, and they're already on their 9th in the States.
Yeah, that's amazing.
This was the only Beatles album initially to lose money when it first was released. There was a bit of controversy involved in the album cover. Apparently, the Beatles were none too pleased with the way their American label were treating or butchering their output. So they took a photo of themselves as butchers, draped in bloody meat with decapitated baby dolls. These are our babies that you're butchering.
And laughing and smiling the whole time.
Copies of this album actually got out before they were recalled, and they are stupidly rare and expensive. Eventually the albums were recalled and they were pasted over with a less offensive cover of them basically sitting in a trunk with a white background. This caused a lot of fans to try to peel their labels off to get the original cover, but often wrecking their sleeves, etc. So an original butcher cover is highly sought after prize.
And the really good condition ones are worth a lot. I don't know.
Alan Livingston was like the vice president of Capitol or whatever, and a few of his, he took a whole box of them. And if you have a Livingston butcher cover in your collection, you are probably a very wealthy person because they've gone upwards of a couple $100,000 in auctions. So that still didn't deter people from buying it. It was still number one in the charts, until Revolver came out. This album has 11 songs on it. Some of the tracks include Drive My Car, I'm Only Sleeping, Nowhere Man, Dr. Robert, A and B sides of their current single, the Day Tripper, We Can Work It Out. So it's just like a solid album all the way through. My favorite songs on the record are actually Nowhere Man, Andrew Bird Can Sing, and George Harrison's If I Needed Someone. 2/3 of those songs I mentioned were actually, excised from the UK Rubber Soul album. Andrew Bird Can Sing was actually from the upcoming Revolver album. It's weird that Yesterday and Today has Revolver tracks that were released 2 months before Revolver came out, which is crazy. I think my least favorite tracks are actually, this is going to sound like heresy, but Yesterday is my least favorite song for that record.
I gotta be honest, that's probably not one of my favorite Beatles songs in general. It's good, it's a classic, but it's not one of my favorites.
But I mean, if you've got an album where, your least favorite song happens to be the most covered song in recorded history, you got a good collection of songs there. The other two that I'm not really crazy about, but I mean, it's the Beatles, is Act Naturally, the Buck Owens cover, sung by Ringo, and then What Goes On, which might as well be a Buck Owens cover, also sung by Ringo.
Which was in fact an early Beatles song that was rejected before, but finished off for Rubber Soul and has a Richard Starkey co-credit.
Yeah, one of the rare, if not only, Lennon-McCartney-Starkey compositions in the whole Beatles catalog. Some final impressions on the album is, despite the hodgepodge nature of it, like tracks from this album, tracks from that album, A-sides, B-sides, singles, it shouldn't hang together as well as a whole album as it does, but it does. It's a great album from start to finish. And I mean, there was essentially 4 singles released from it at the time. Yesterday and Act Naturally was released sort of between Help and Rubber Soul. Day Tripper, We Can Work It Out was released the same day as Rubber Soul, and then Nowhere Man, What Goes On was released in sort of preparation for this album. So again, so many hit singles. You can't go wrong with this record at all. It's short. It's 27 minutes long. I think I would give it 4 decapitated baby dolls out of 5. That would be my rating for the Beatles Yesterday and Today. So, John, what do you got for us today?
Goat Rodeo Sessions. This is a really unique album. I got this one from our friend, Simon Thompson. It's Yo-Yo Ma, Stuart Duncan, Edgar Meyer, and Chris Thile. It was released on October 24th, 2011, produced by Stephen Epstein. Basically, you've got Yo-Yo Ma on the cello, Stuart Duncan on fiddle, banjo, mandolin, Edgar Meyer, bass, piano, and gamba, which I can tell you what a gamba is, a 15th century Spanish stringed instrument, bowed or fretted, and it's in the viol family.
Okay, so it's not like a lute. You play it sort of like a violin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
2 of the songs have Aoife O'Donovan on vocals, Here in Heaven and No One But You. Favorite songs on here would be Quarter Chicken Dark. It's kind of a nice instrumental. It has some cool bass playing on it, and it's the second track on the album. It's really cool. Here in Heaven, as I say, that's one of the songs with Aoife O'Donovan on vocals. It's a good upbeat country folk tune, very folky, sort of very rootsy, like the whole album is.
If you had to compare Aoife's vocals to anybody, who would you say she sounds like?
She doesn't really sound like Sarah McLachlan, but she does have a unique blend with Chris Thile, because a lot of the singing they do is all in harmony. Like, it's all harmonizing, just the two of them. Franz and the Eagle, which is very classical, with Meyer's piano coming to the fore. No One But You, again, Aoife O'Donovan and Chris Thile singing really well together. And that's a slower one. It kind of seems to deal with, the lyrics seem to deal with kids and what it's like to become a parent, I think. Least favorite tracks are probably Where's My Bow or Helping Hand. They're not bad. They're good pieces, but they're just the ones that kind of don't stick in my memory. Like, I couldn't tell you, I couldn't just sit here and hum it right now. It's all good. Sometimes there's stuff that doesn't stick with you, and then other stuff that does. Final impressions would be, this album is a very enjoyable listen. These are great musicians who sound like they are very much enjoying playing together. The title, by the way, Goat Rodeo, means a situation requiring about 100 things to go right in order to survive it. So, in terms of a rating, I would give this 4 out of 5 gambas. That's 4 out of 5 gambas. The thing is, Yo-Yo Ma he's not credited with writing any of this. He's just kind of, I wouldn't say he's just kind of there, but he's just a happy participant, but the pieces were written by the rest of the group. With Yo-Yo Ma, like, I think because he's a classical musician, he just was happy, I guess, to just let them write out or prepare parts for him. He's not to the fore. Chris Thile is a lot to the fore, and
Sometimes to the 5.
Oh, you clever person. Chris Thile, there's a lot of him on there, and I really haven't been able to quite pick out who's exactly doing what, but it's a very enjoyable album. So thank you again, Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
What's next on your plate, Tyson?
Well, the next record I'm going to talk about is an album called The Man Machine by Kraftwerk. Initially released in May of 1978, it's Kraftwerk's 7th album released on EMI. It contains the singles The Robots and The Model. Initially, when it was released in England, it failed to chart, but it peaked at number 9 when re-released 4 years later. That seems to be the case with a lot of electropop bands. They don't get the props right away, but then something happens and it comes out again. And the album was produced by Rolf Hutter and Florian Schneider. Those are basically the two brains behind Kraftwerk their entire career. The musicians on the record are Rolf and Florian doing voice vocoder, synthesizer, electronics. Florian doing the same, but he was more the singer when there's actual singing going on. Karl Bartos did electric drums and programming, and Wolfgang Flür did the same. They basically had sort of two guys triggering percussion, while Rolf and Florian did all the synthesizer sequencing and vocals and what have you. It's a 6-song album at about 36 minutes long. Tracks include Robots, Space Lab, Metropolis, The Model, Neon Lights, and The Man Machine. My 2 favorite tracks on the record are The Model and The Robots. This album, I've noticed over the years, I've heard it without knowing that I've heard it. A lot of people have sampled from Kraftwerk, which would lead me to, well, we'll talk about my favorite tracks first before I go to my least favorite track. So, The Model was a single. It did pretty well everywhere, but like I said, the UK. Even The Residents with Snakefinger kind of had a hit with their cover of The Model, so it shows you how sort of well regarded that area of Kraftwerk were. This was one of the albums that was released in both English and German. I have both versions. Again, The Robots is a really neat song, really hypnotic. They're really pioneering in their use of synths and sequencing, and like this is a proto-electronic album. Any kind of EDM you hear today from like Skrillex to whatever, they owe their entire debt to Kraftwerk. And the thing that blows my mind is all this stuff was 100% analog. And a lot of their gear was they built themselves, they engineered themselves. Like they used a lot of like Moog and stuff like that too, but a lot of the gizmos and vocoders and stuff they built. They're like these like German scientist guys working away in their lab coming up with this kind of cold, clinical sounding music, but it's amazing the stuff they came up with just, synthesizers and homemade sequencers. My least favorite track, and again, it's a stupid reason to have it because I like the whole album. There's not really one song that I would hit skip on, but it's the title song called The Man Machine. And again, this goes back to the sampling I was talking about earlier. There's a song by Two Live Crew called Dick Almighty. And it heavily uses Man Machine as a riff. So every time I hear the Man Machine riff, my brain immediately goes to stupid Two Live Crew's Dick Almighty lyrics. And that kind of spoils it for me because, Man Machine is pretty much all instrumental except for the word machine over and over again with vocoder. Daft Punk owes their existence to these guys. Like, my final impression, again, it's, like I said, it's groundbreaking and everything electronic. I'm a synthesizer nut. And I mean, it could be off-putting when you first listen to it because it's really, cold sounding, very clinical, but catchy. So, as an overall album, I would give the Man Machine 5 robots out of 5.
Add a model. Throw a model in there too.
That's Kraftwerk's The Man Machine.
Well, not only that, they influenced people all the way from David Bowie, who named a song V2 Schneider because of Florian Schneider.
Yes.
And to Neil Young, who did the album Trans, totally inspired by Kraftwerk.
One of the reasons why I really liked Neil Young's Trans album was because it was all synthy and weird, and then, yeah, you can definitely hear the influence, Kraftwerk's influence, especially on the synthier tunes on Trans.
Like Sample and Hold and stuff.
But speaking of Neil Young, Sean, you're doing a Neil Young record?
Yes. Well, I mean, I was in the studio doing a Neil Young record. No. I'm reviewing one, yes.
Yeah.
But I'm not making one. I can't make one because I'm not Neil Young.
Right.
But yes, Sleeps with Angels, which was released on August 16th, 1994, produced by Neil Young and David Briggs, featuring, obviously, Neil Young on guitar, tack piano, accordion, flute, harmonica, and vocals. Frank Pancho Sampedro, guitar, grand piano, electric piano, keyboards, bass, marimbas, and vocals. Billy Talbot, bass, vibes, bass marimba, and vocals. Ralph Molina, drums and vocals. This album is said to be heavily inspired by the death of Kurt Cobain, who apparently at one point Neil Young was trying to get a hold of Kurt Cobain, but never actually did. But of course, then Kurt Cobain committed suicide. Of course, we all know when Courtney Love read out the suicide note, there was the famous, and remember, and don't remember this because it's a fucking lie, it's better to burn out than fade away. That whole...
Quoting
thing.
Neil Young.
Right? Yeah. But don't remember this because it's a lie.
So you'd say that maybe Sleeps with Angels was definitely a reaction, like Neil might have felt a little bit of guilt towards that.
Yeah, and at the time it was thought that Neil had said, okay, I'm never performing My Hey Hey again. But in the Neil TV special in 96 on Much Music, somebody asked him about that, and he's like, no, I never said that. So there you have it. This album, back to the album, it features Neil and the Horse in atmospheric mode rather than just straight rocking out mode like say on Ragged Glory or Zuma, using instruments including but not limited to guitar, bass, drums, and that, as I've just read off the whole list of what they play, so it's got, leading into my favorite songs here, My Heart, which is a very nice ballad featuring Young on tack piano and very gentle. It's a very gentle song. Neil singing it very gently. It sounds like to me, it kind of sounds like, those school pageants where they have the teacher playing the piano and the students are singing, but it's Neil Young singing. To me, it's one of those songs, we always talk about songs that get you.
Yeah, that strike you to your emotional core, basically.
Yeah.
Like, you hear it, and if you have a soul, it makes you well up and just enjoy the beauty of creativity.
I hope you all do have souls. I mean, I don't want to get controversial, but but yeah, that's one of my favorite songs on the album. It's beautiful. It's a great, gentle opening track. An honorable mention to its closing track counterpart, which is A Dream That Can Last, which is a different song, but it's also tack piano-y. But the next song I was going to talk about is Change Your Mind, which is nearly 15 minutes of great guitar work and lyrics from Neil and guitar work from Poncho and Neil, and one of the best known songs from the album, because I think an edited version of it was kind of a hit. If you like those Down by the River, Cortez the Killer, Like a Hurricane type songs, then this is for you. I like it too. Blue Eden, which is a bluesy jam, credited as being written by Neil and the Horse, like all of them. It's basically just a bluesy jam, but it recaps lyrics from various other songs on the album. But there's one moment that I really love about it where when Neil Young sings the last line, he's like, "It's just a part of life." And it sounds like the music is like blasting him out of there, like he's been blown away by the hurricane of sound or something. Neil Young has a lot of those moments on his album where his vocals just, you can tell that he's really, like, even just for a line or a second, he's feeling exactly what he's singing. My last favorite song on here would be Piece of Crap. That's like just, it's a great fun rocker with verses about consumerism and the environment. But it says here. But also, going back to the Neil TV Much Music special, he talked about, someone asked him what inspired that song, and basically it was about 2 fax machines that he bought that didn't work. And so he wrote a song about them being pieces of crap. The cool thing about it is you get to hear Neil and the Horse at various times yelling, "Piece of crap!" So least favorite songs, Trans Am, which is okay. It's not a bad song. It's kind of about like the western frontier and the pioneers settling and all that.
So it's not about Burt Reynolds' car from Smokey and the Bandit?
It's an okay song, but it's a bit slow and monotonous for my taste. And Safeway Cart, it's also good. Like, the whole album is good, but I had to pick some least favorite songs.
Yeah.
But those are 2 that are, shoved back towards the end of the album, and they just kind of slow things down a bit. Then you get to Piece of Crap, and it's more fun. But, yeah, so I think it's one of Neil Young's best 90s albums, along with Harvest Moon. Technically, Ragged Glory is a better-known album, but I like the darker atmosphere and the weirder experimental sounds they're going for on this one. Like, Ragged Glory, has some really good stuff on it. I mean, we saw them do Fucking Up live.
Yeah.
And apart from the weird jerk-off ending, it was good. I just like the weirdness, the atmospheric side of Sleeps with Angels. So, in terms of a rating, I would give this 4 pieces of crap out of 5.
All right. Excellent.
And so, I believe you have one more album for us.
I do.
And so do I, but...
The third album I chose for this week's podcast is kind of an obscure little ditty that came out in 1970. It's a self-titled record by a South African band called The Flame. Now, Beach Boys historians would note that 2 members of The Flame, Blondie Chaplin and Ricky Fataar, after the very release of this album, jumped ship and joined the Beach Boys. It's not really a surprise per se, as The Flame's debut album is produced by Beach Boy Carl Wilson. And the album itself was the only record on the Beach Boys Brother Records label that wasn't a Beach Boys album. It was originally released in October of 1970. It was widely regarded as the first ever quadrophonically mixed album. There may be some debate about that. I don't know. I haven't heard any stats saying, no, it was this other album. It was Switched on Bach by Walter Carlos or something like that.
Dark Side of the Moon.
The personnel on the record, I've mentioned Blondie, Chaplin, and Ricky Fataar. Chaplin is a guitarist and a singer. Ricky Fataar is a multi-instrumentalist. Now, he plays drums, guitar, he sings. He wound up being a Ruddle.
Yeah, Stig.
Stig O'Hara in the Ruddles, and Eric Idle's
Stig?
a big Valerie here. He wound up being one of the fake Beatles in Eric Idle's The Ruddles mockumentary in the late 70s. The track listing includes See the Light, Make It Easy, Hey Lord, Lady, Don't Worry Bill, Got Your Mind Made Up, Highs and Lows, Happy, Dove, Another Day in Heaven, and See the Light Reprise. My favorite tracks on the record are See the Light, which has a paperback writer sort of feel. The next track I really liked is a song called Don't Worry Bill, which starts out as sort of the whole song wouldn't sound out of place as part of the Abbey Road medley kind of thing, because it's really two separate songs. You got sort of a nice little ballad at the beginning. I believe it's sung by Steve Fataar, Ricky's brother, and then Blondie takes the second half. The Beach Boys actually would perform the second half of the song as part of a medley with a live version of the Smile song Wonderful. So it was interesting to hear that first part of the song I was not familiar with and how it led to the second part. The last song I really like is a song called Highs and Lows. Again, it's because it's contrasting stylistically. It has a nice slow sort of ballad, but then when the chorus kicks in, it sounds like Rolling Stones meets the Beach Boys. Their codas are just harmonically just really tasty. Overall, the whole record is just like a great rock and roll record. Not pretentious, well performed, well produced. It's a shame that it was not a hit, because as a one and done, it makes me really want more. And I mean, they did Blondie and Ricky, who were like the Lennon-McCartney of the band, we'll say. They did join the Beach Boys and have a couple songs on the subsequent Beach Boys releases, Carl and the Passions and Holland, and it kind of makes me wonder what the Beach Boys would have sounded like if they would have continued on beyond those two albums.
Or alternately, what the Flame would have done had they kept going on their own. They might have eventually cracked the
market.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting too. They got the name of the Flame. It was kind of like an Ellis Island renaming, because there's already a band in the States called the Flames. Back in South Africa, they were known as the Flames. They had at least about 5 or 6 albums there under the name The Flames, but they didn't want to be confused with James Brown's backup band at the time, which was the Famous Flames. So they just dropped the S. My least favorite track on the album, honestly, the whole album is just killer. Like, I've been listening to it every day nonstop for the last week since I found it. I would have to say it's got a reprise, not unlike Sgt. Pepper, but the reprise is a little lazy. The Beatles managed to do a completely different recording on their reprise, whereas See the Light just takes the instrumental breakdown from that point to the fade out. They fade back up with that, but they pitch shift it down like half a step, so it's a little slower, but it's literally the same song. I take a point off for laziness there. Again, overall, I really like how vibrant and 60s and Beatles influence it is, because I'm a huge Beatle fan, and the Beach Boy connection is really evident in the vocal harmonies and arrangements. It definitely would appeal to like Beatles and Beach Boys fans for sure, and not just out of like a morbid curiosity. Oh, I want to hear what these guys sounded like, having read about them in various Beach Boys biographies and whatnot. And I was not disappointed.
And having heard their contributions to Carl and the Passions in Holland,
Yes.
it's not at all far removed from that.
So I think I would give this album. I'm gonna take a star off for the laziness of See the Light. I know it's being harsh because See the Light reprise is only like 30 seconds, and the whole rest of the album is just amazing. But I think I'm going to have to give it. I'll dock it half mark. I'll give it 4.5 ladies out of 5.
Ooh.
So that's a good place to be in. All right. Last but not least, we're going to talk about. Well, Sean's going to talk about an album by both of our favorite bands of all time.
This is the debut album by a little-known progressive. Well, not little-known really, but
Probably the Beatles of progressive rock again, going back to the Beatles.
Called Yes. Well, actually, that's funny because they do a Beatles song on this album. You see how it all works out?
It's all interconnected. It's a vast tapestry.
Yeah, so this is the first album by Yes, which is simply called Yes. It was released on the 25th of June, 1969 on Atlantic Records, produced by Paul Clay and Yes. You've got John Anderson on lead vocals and apparently incidental percussion, Peter Banks, guitar and vocals, Chris Squire, bass and vocals, Tony Kaye, keyboards, and oddly enough, there's one person playing on this album who we actually met, Bill Bruford on drums, vibraphone on Yesterday and Today, which, again, Yesterday and Today. See Tyson's previous utterances.
It all fits together.
This album contains 2 cover songs, The Byrds' I See You, and The Beatles' Every Little Thing, which incidentally is not on Yesterday and Today.
No.
Bill Bruford remembers the recording of this album being very loud, especially Peter Banks' guitar. Bill Bruford did not yet realize that you could adjust the levels and turn sounds down in the earphones, so he recalls an almost deafening Peter Banks playing away in his ear because that he didn't know you could say, could you turn down the guitars, please? 2 of the musicians on this album are now no longer with us. Peter Banks passed away on March 7th, 2013 at age 65. Chris Squire on June 27th of 2015. May they both rest in peace. Yes were formed when John Anderson met Chris Squire in a club called La Chasse, where Anderson was working at the time. They hit it off over a shared love of Simon and Garfunkel and started writing songs together. Bruford entered the picture after answering an ad in Melody Maker, and Banks was in a band called The Sin with Squire, and I think was probably in Mabel Greer's toy shop, which became Yes. They changed it to Yes because John Anderson joined, and he was like, we need to shorten the name, guys. And so Chris Squire came up with Life, or somebody came up with Life, somebody came up with World, and Peter Banks came up with Yes. So it's like, is it the Yes? No, just Yes. And then apparently John Anderson remembers going around saying, what are you called? Yes. Yeah, but what are you called? Yes. Tony Kaye is someone they kind of knew from around the London scene at the time. Favorite tracks, Beyond and Before, written by Chris Squire and Clive Bailey. This is a very wintry song. It's about winter. Lots of fantastic harmonies. They were, even those days and later, they were amazing harmonizers. Anderson, Squire, and Banks. Looking Around, which was written by John Anderson and Chris Squire. It's the most rocking track on the album, and probably the best work Tony Kaye did on this album. Lots of Hammond organ and, cool stuff like that.
Oh, I'm a big fan of Tony Kaye's playing. He's a good Hammond player, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he left the band because he didn't really want to go into the Moogs and Mellotrons and all that stuff. Survival. This is the song on the album that pretty much points the way to the road ahead, with a nice extended intro which leads into a really good harmony-drenched song about life and death. and, well, survival.
Yeah, if you don't die, you're surviving. So
Yeah, so keep it up. Least favorites. I See You. The actual song is good with the jazz feel and great harmonies, but the Banks Bruford jam in the middle is kind of a snooze. I find it's kind of noodly. Yeah, it's good. I like it. It's cool and really jazzy, but you could have taken out the middle bit. Yesterday and Today, which is a very nice ballad, but it's a bit fillerish.
good Beatles album too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Honorable mention goes to the song "Something's Coming," which was recorded during the sessions for the first Yes album, and it's actually a cover of a tune from West Side Story, and it's really, really great, really jazzy and harmonized and everything. It should have been on the album.
It totally should have been on the album. I agree.
The great thing about a lot of the songs on this album is how enthusiastic Yes sounds. They sound really like they're
Happy to be there.
yeah, I mean, in spite of the fact that they kind of had a hard time making their first album, they still made it sound really energetic and vibrant,
Well, the thing I like about the first album is that how they hit the ground running.
Yeah.
Their sound was already there. Usually, there's not too many bands that hit it out of the park on their first record. So
But-
overall, would you give?
The rating, I would give this album 3 survivals out of 5. Because, it does have, it is a fun, enjoyable, nice, clever album, but it does have some weaker bits. Like Harold Land comes off a bit preachy. It's not a bad song, but it comes off a bit preachy.
That's about it for today. I think we covered all the albums we wanted to get to. Again, if you enjoy this podcast, subscribe to my channel. Tell your friends, and we will see you again. But for now, this has been the Music is the Best podcast with
Sean.
and Tyson.